Okay, welcome back to another Sabbath School lesson. We're going to be looking at lesson 8. This is going to be over the promise is the title of it. And also, this is going to be going through Genesis chapters 21 through 25. So let's go ahead and read the memory verse. Memory verse says Genesis chapter 24 and verse 1. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. Now, the two main themes of this lesson, and really there's more themes, but this is the two biggest themes that you're going to find in this lesson this week, is going to be Abraham and Isaac's big test, and then the other is going to be the search for Isaac's bride. So Abraham and Isaac's big test and the search for Isaac's bride. So in this lesson, finally, the promised child is born. In chapter 21, Isaac is also born, going into chapter 22. And what you're going to find here is that some years after Isaac is born and Isaac is growing up and everybody loves him, he's this great child, God asks Abraham to do a powerful and distinctive lesson. So what interesting enough, he tells him to go up to Mount Moriah. And on Mount Moriah, tells him to offer his son. So Abraham and Isaac are headed up Mount Moriah, and God has asked Abraham to basically, I was going to say crucify. He didn't ask him to crucify, but he did ask him to kill his son as an offering. Now, this is strange because Abraham has finally received the promise that he's waiting for. Isaac is now born. This is the promised child. Why would you ask me to now kill the promise that you've given me? But here's the thing about Abraham, and this is what most people, I think, steer off in the wrong direction. We tend to think Abraham is the father of faith, and Abraham is not really the father of faith. Faith has been around a long time. There are many people that believed in God. Enoch believed in God. He had incredible faith. Noah believed in God. He believed in God and ended up waiting 120 years building an ark, right? Until this giant storm comes. So there were people that had faith, right? The difference in Abraham is that there's a difference in the type of faith that he's supposed to show. And what you're going to see here is in Hebrews 11, chapter 17 through 19. And it says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called. He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type. Now, I know that was a lot there, but here's the main point. Abraham, when he went up the mountain, thinking back on all the experiences that he had with God, he started to reason and say, you know what? Even though this doesn't make sense for me to actually kill, my son, the promise, maybe God might raise this child back from the dead. And so he started to reason that God could even raise the dead. And here's the point with that. Up until this time in Earth's history, Abraham had never seen anyone get raised from the dead. In fact, there is no one, at least in the record of Genesis that we see, that was raised from the dead. So Abraham is believing that God can do something, not only that he's never seen, but that actually has never happened in human history. So this is a different type of faith that Abraham is now projecting. And Abraham at least starts to pass this test. But let me change the definition of what Father Abraham means for you. And it's simply this. Abraham is not the father of faith. Abraham is the father of those who believe in God when God does not meet your expectation. Abraham is the father of those who believe in God when God does not meet your expectation. So Abraham goes his entire life going throughout this huge journey of trials. He gets to the promised land and the land is in a famine. Everything is in haywire. And what does he do? He rationalizes that maybe I need to go down to Egypt to feed my family. He gets to Egypt and then he starts to rationalize, maybe I need to tell Sarah to lie, so I can stay alive and they don't kill me because she's beautiful. Every step of Abraham's journey, he's rationalizing his way out of situations. And on this one time, you start to see that Abraham learned a powerful lesson. He doesn't rationalize himself out of killing Isaac. He just hears that God wants it done, and he decides to go ahead and go forward with it. Even though it doesn't make sense, Abraham is the father of those who believe in God when God doesn't make sense. Those who believe in God when things aren't working out. Those who believe in God when God does not meet your expectations. So that's the first main point to get out of this lesson. So going forward after that, You're going to see in chapter 23 and chapter 24, Sarah unfortunately ends up dying. And also in 24, they need to prepare a bride for Isaac. So Isaac is now an actual man, but he needs a woman, and Abraham is trying to find a woman to comfort Isaac because he knows he's going to pass away soon. So he sends his servant out to actually find a bride for Isaac. And this is where the story gets very interesting. And this is going to be your profound meditation. What's interesting about this story is that the servant obviously has been with Abraham a long time. It's a very trusted servant, and Abraham sends this servant out, and he's now going to develop a test to try to find Isaac's bride. But the question is, how is he going to do it? How is he going to come up with Isaac's bride? Well, the servant, what he does is, you can see he starts to reflect back on what he knows about Abraham's family. And one thing that he starts to kind of see is that Abraham has really shown extreme hospitality. You remember the time in which we spoke about in the last lesson that Abraham actually shamed himself as an old man running out to these strangers that actually were passing through an area that he was sitting, just to invite them in and offer them a meal. So in that time period, again, old men did not run. That was a part of basically the custom of the time. If an old man ran, it was considered shameful. So for Abraham to run after a person like that, to shame himself to bring someone else hospitality, it's incredibly significant. And the servant sees that it's like a #1 priority in Abraham's household. Any woman that's supposed to step foot in Abraham's household should have extreme hospitality. So he comes over to an area and prays that God would bring a woman, that he'll ask the woman for some water. And if the woman offers out of her free will to give him water, but also water his camels, then that's showing she's going above and beyond just for this random stranger she doesn't even know. That's the same characteristic that the servant has seen in the house of Abraham. Sometimes we don't connect the dots like that, but it's not just that he randomly popped on a test and just asked for some random woman to give him some water and it all happened like that. The servant was reflecting back on what he's seen in the actual family of Abraham. And it's a good point for you to also remember, because I want to ask you this question. What's the prime characteristic that you've seen in your family? Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing. I don't know. Maybe you want to change it if you don't like what that answer is. But what's a prime characteristic that you've seen in your family? If you were going to invite people into your family to be your bride or your husband or even just a friend, what's the prime characteristic that you want your friend group to look like, if you could come up with something? The other thing I want you to notice, remember when I told you that Abraham shamed himself running out to these strangers as an old man running out to go show somebody some hospitality? Something just to remember is this. At the time, Abraham was unsure about when the promise was going to happen when he did that. However, these strangers were actually coming to tell him the appropriate time that the promise was actually going to occur. Now, you're like, well, what does that mean? What that means is this. Abraham was showing people still extreme hospitality, even when God was not meeting his expectations. Even when he was going through frustrating times with God, he never stopped serving others. In fact, the reason you could actually argue that Abraham found out the time that Isaac was actually going to be born, because he was told by these strangers, was because he decided to do his everyday duties of serving others. And what you'll find is simply this, that many times the details of God's mission in your life will be revealed as you daily serve others. Many times you don't want to serve God or serve others because you're frustrated about the stuff in your life, that things are going wrong. But the point is, if you do the daily serving of other activity, many times the details of God's mission in your life will be revealed as you daily serve others. I'm Oswald, and this is Profound Meditations Sabbath School Summer.